Hello, everyone. We are back. Neha and I have mostly recovered from plagues, I think. And we decided instead of you just listening to us cough for a full 30 minutes again, that we could maybe bring on a guest who's appearing so far not to be coughing. So, Neha, do you want to introduce our wee guest we've got today?
Yes, this is Denise. Denise has worked with me and Mike at GitHub, but I first saw Denise do a talk, I think with Write Speak Code a long time ago, and I was captivated. Denise and I don't know at the same time or not, we both worked at Pivotal as well, so we've had like some shared understanding, and we got to work on the same team. I got to manage Denise as her first time as a manager, which was, I think, a new experience for both of us actually. I was just new to managing managers as well. And since then, she's gone off to do amazing things everywhere. And most recently, I had the pleasure of watching Denise do a talk at LeadDev that I felt like struck such a strong chord with me because it was stuff that we talked about a lot and it's stuff that Mike and I have talked about a lot. And it's about like politics in the workplace. So if you watch any one talk on the LeadDev website. Her talk is called Leading Sustainably When Everything is on Fire. And I'll give my own summary if you want, and then I'll let like Denise kind of talk about herself and highlight any other points she wanted to make. What resonated with me was that, you know, as managers, we navigate information asymmetry on our team. And as you can see, she's used every word very carefully. You don't let everything through. You don't prevent everything. You navigate it. You figure out what to let through, and that asymmetry and acknowledging that that asymmetry exists is a very big part of being a manager. She introduced this like currency called table flips. So it's like a way to quantify political capital in terms of like how you could spend it. And usually you think about like accruing it instead of spending it. And so Denise really flips the table on how to talk about it. And then I think there was another quote that I wrote down because I loved it so much. And it was about making, especially when you're trying to think about what to move and what not to move, you can't move every boulder. And so she said it's about making good tactical decisions around the deployment around political capital. And so I just feel like I love talking to Denise about these things because every word she selected is like very careful and very intentional. And she really thinks about the agency of choice and the level of responsibility we have when it comes to these things. And so that's why I'm really excited to have Denise on the podcast.
Awesome.
Denise, do you want to add anything and like share anything else that like you thought about when you were making that talk?
Yeah. Thanks so much to Neha and Mike for having me on the podcast. Very excited to be here. Been a hot second since I've done any podcast, actually. So this is super fun. Um, yeah, I was asked by LeadDev to do the talk back in January, February. So the worst thing that you can do to me is ask me to do a talk like 9 months in advance because I will just be spiraling about what I'm going to talk about for 9 months. And so I think I landed on the topic of basically wanting to talk about politics at work, which is obviously a huge topic. And I'm still relatively new to management. I haven't been doing management for decades. I've been doing it for a couple of years now. So I didn't feel like I was positioned to give the, like here's the end all guide to navigating politics in the workplace. I didn't feel comfortable coming at it from that angle. So it was the whole talk was extremely informed by my personal experiences of making mistakes in this area and then learning from those mistakes and applying what I learned to my management practice to try to help others avoid the same kind of mistakes that I made early career about not understanding the basic premise that everything you do at work involves political capital. And I know that is an uncomfortable thing to think about for a lot of us, especially a lot of us who come from very technical backgrounds. We think that things should be meritocratic. We think that we should be judged on the fruits of our efforts, our, objective, measurable outcomes, that kind of thing. But my experience over the last, decade plus of being in the tech industry has shown that repeatedly that's not true. Repeatedly, it's unfortunately not good enough to just do a really, really good job at work every day. As you get into the higher ends of the career ladder or want to go into the leadership track, building an understanding about workplace politics is actually a pretty critical survival tactic, I think, both for yourself and eventually for the team that you will be responsible for.
You know, what this makes me think about is like when I first met Mike at GitHub. He immediately was looking for a way to add value because I am suspicious to anyone who's nice to me, which is due to childhood trauma that we are not going to talk about right now. I was like, what is Mike up to? And I actually think that Mike's really good at building political capital. He kind of understands the game, especially when new people come in. And I'm kind of curious, Mike, from inside your head, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I guess like it's funny because the way you were talking about kind of table flips and stuff earlier, like the word I've always used internally is like karma. Not that I believe in kind of like philosophical karma or whatever on a real religious sense, but I definitely like see it in the workplace, right? Where if you're someone who just like takes all the time, then generally people stop wanting to help you. And if you're someone who gives a lot, then you kind of build up or political capital or ability to table flip or whatever you want to call it, right? And I guess I realized in GitHub as GitHub kind of grew, I guess in my case, for context for anyone listening, I joined when it was about 200 people. I left when it was like just under 4,000. Seeing like as the company gets bigger, you, as Denise said earlier, like you can't just do a great job and hope that everyone notices or whatever. Like you have to like be a bit more strategic about how I'm going to get things done and who do I need to make happy to get this over the line or whatever it may be. And also just sometimes being like, okay, I'm just going to do this and maybe break some rules and it's going to piss people off, but do I have enough karma in the bank that this is going to stop me getting fired? Right. Because again, for me, like that was the other part of the currency is that like on one side is success, influence, getting what I want done. And then the other side is everyone hates me, I get fired, whatever it may be, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that you're good at sussing out someone who's new and kind of figuring out how they fit into the big picture. That's also a really critical part about being able to navigate a company is figuring out what they are. Like Denise had this diagram of okay, cool. You might have political capital, but does your manager have political capital? And what about their peers? And it's not enough for you to do it yourself. You have to figure out how everyone fits into the puzzle. So Denise, I was kind of curious if you had any major realizations around political capital and leadership, either recently or one that's stuck with you for a really long time.
My current manager uses the phrase, I am cloaked in political capital all the time, as in kind of a healthy way. He recognizes that as a white guy, in management, there are a lot of things that he can get away with. And that was
Mm.
having this kind of conversation with my manager over and over again this past year has been one of the sort of inputs into the talk. I spend quite a lot of time pondering how like white guys specifically do have more ability to kind of do what they I also realized I didn't do this on purpose. The mug that I have right now, the just I grabbed is a cartoon of a cat saying I do what I want, putting middle fingers up, which I completely just grabbed by accident this morning.
That's the
It's
goal.
on
That's the
brand.
goal in life.
Yeah, exactly. This is what we all aspire for. In a perfect world where we all have a perfect symmetry of political capital access. That's what we can all do. But one thing I have been thinking about more recently is if you just have political capital and nothing else, then what is your responsibility? So I'll try to make that a little more concrete. I've seen people get to the end of their journey with an organization where they sort of realize, all right, I've learned all I can here. I've done the work that I want to do here. Maybe it's time for me to move on. But sometimes when you get to that stage, you still have a lot of political capital left in the bank, actually. And so one of my peers recently left the company, also a white man, who really leaned into this. And I thought that was so cool. So he first of all, he's in the EU where they have super, super long notice periods. So he was he had a 3-month notice period and he absolutely just lit things to fire on the way out. And I thought that was so great. It's kind of it can sometimes, the fact that the company knows you're leaving can sometimes dilute the impact of you doing this because they just sort of write you off as oh, he's out the door anyway. He doesn't really care. So maybe let's not really deeply engage with the question he's asking. But I did think it was really cool how on the way out, he would just turn up to AMAs and be like, hey, remember when 6 months ago you said this was going to happen? What's the timeline on that? And still, still use the diplomatic courtesy of not directly calling people out, but still asking pointed questions and trying to create some accountability. So I don't know, it's an interesting time. I think with like the industry is obviously changing a lot. I think a lot of the rules are being rewritten in an age when every company is getting on the AI bandwagon, and the standards for, like what constitutes good performance are changing a lot.
Mm.
I don't know that I necessarily want to get deeply into AI, but I think it's one thing that I've been thinking about since the talk is, yeah, just sort of this theme of like, if you have political capital and nothing else, if you don't have motivation, if you don't have a reason to engage with a long-term vision of your team or your company, then what are some useful things you can still do?
Yeah, I also
Yeah.
think that's maybe where politics kind of gets a bad name, right? Is because people like I guess the case study example of what people don't like about politics is when people exercise political capital purely for personal, like, let's say, monetary gain, right? So I'm just trying to get promoted and a pay rise and a bonus and more headcount purely so I can like build my empire. And like, I think that understandably makes people feel gross if it's done in a way that only benefits you, right? Whereas even while you were talking, Denise, it's like I'm too much of a kind of scaredy cat to light things on fire too much on my way out of places. But like something I remember I did do when I knew I was kind of getting to the end at GitHub is I basically had a list of people who I felt were like in my org who should have a promotion. And I'm like, I'm going to go and dedicate a ridiculous amount of my time to trying to get those people promoted on the way out. I was able to get a bunch of them promoted and that felt really good. Right. And again, like that's the type of thing where it's like, if you go from advocating for one promotion to 10 in a 6-month period, that kind of like burns some bridges in some ways, but also in other ways, obviously, like builds bridges, and you're left with kind of a sense that, like, hey, this is good. And also, it looks less naked. It doesn't look like I'm trying to almost like put all my pawns in the right places or whatever when you're doing that on your way out. It looks like you're just trying to build people up. And I guess I would say to people who might be listening who are like, I don't know, not unsure about getting involved with politics or whatever, if you're still unconvinced that you have to, then another way of looking at it is like, well, if you're like trying to be a good person and trying to help people at work, then you can't do that without political capital, right? And if you almost like see a bunch of people who are playing politics and winning in a way that you don't like, it's like, well, maybe you got to play the game if you want to like let your team win, right?
I just wanted to respond to Mike's point and say that it's so interesting hearing Mike talk about advocating for other people to get promoted, because at GitHub, you were never a manager. You were a staff engineer and then later principal engineer at GitHub. And that's so cool because the talk that I did at LeadDev was mostly pitched at engineering managers, but definitely like a huge part of it is that people at the senior plus level also have political capital. Everybody has a little bit, but I wouldn't really expect junior and mid-level engineers that, you put your own oxygen mask on at that stage. But at the senior plus levels, everyone does have a role to play in thinking about how you spend your political capital. And you absolutely, this is one of the ways, like when we talk about leading from the back of the room or leading without formal authority, like this is one of those things.
Yeah, and I think like also going back to what Mike said around why should I engage in politics if it's so icky? It is like there's a natural equilibrium and there's like a natural way that like things will fall into place. And if you don't like it, then you have to get into the ring, right? And let's be real, it is not going to be the natural equilibrium of a company is not going to be in a way that like benefits the employees the most because that's like not that's not how capitalistic societies work. And so obviously it's going to be a way that benefits the business or something else. And so if you want to, like as a manager or as you grow in the leadership chain, you want to put your thumb on the scale on something. Now, you can't put your thumb on the scale on everything. Because if you put your thumb on the scale on everything, one, it's diluted. Two, you spend it all at once. And three, you're going to be putting your thumb on the scale on things that don't move. And that, if you keep on doing that and you expend energy on something that doesn't change, you will burn out. And so you have to know, like, one is understand accruing political capital, level one. Level two is like spending political capital. And then level three is like knowing when to spend political capital so you don't burn out as part of it, right? I think like when you were talking, Denise, I was like, okay, so as a non-white man, I may not have the same political capital as someone else does. And I want to motivate them to use political capital in a certain way. Like, how do you motivate someone else to use political capital? And like, how do you assess it and then like understand and motivate someone else to use it? Mike, my question for you, which is like not fully spicy, but a little spicy. Have you ever felt like someone was approaching you and like asking you to like blatantly spend your political capital on something? And like, when have you been like, no? And when have you been like, yes,
Yes, I
as a
have.
white man?
Often that person was called Neha. Um, I was going
They've
to
caught
joke
me.
about that earlier. Neha and I would sometimes have these like little strategies in our one-on-one where it's like, look, is this going to come best from like a principal engineer, an open source maintainer, like the best manager GitHub's ever seen, the best director GitHub's ever seen? Almost like when we had the same goals in mind, almost like which of us going in first is going to have a better impact there. Yeah. And like, obviously, like I, as a white man, am not aware of the level of privilege I have in certain ways. I don't know what it's like to not be me, but there was a certain amount of that in our discussions as well, right? Where people in the organization who are like, look, like if it's coming from a woman of color or a white man, they're going to react the same. And then the people in the organization who it's like, yeah, that person's going to instinctively have their back up for people coming in who don't look and sound like them. So maybe someone else goes in first and that, I think that's the thing. Like for me, it's all about trying to be pragmatic, right? Like I think Denise and I were talking a little bit before we got started actually about how, so GitHub staff engineer, apologies, I'm going to butcher his name, Sean Godek, I think, something like that. He
Hideki, yeah,
works,
something like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think he works on a team with mutual friend of the podcast, Yumin Wong nowadays. But he had a post recently where he was saying software engineers should be a little bit cynical, in which one of the things that kind of made me think reading about it was like about how often like I see software engineers can be so incredibly idealistic about like, we'll have the code and the tech and the architecture can all be beautiful and pure and whatever. But then like, oh, politics and like maybe even like making people like me at work, like, oh, that stuff's kind of icky and messy. And like, I'm going to be sort of cynical about that. And just his idea of being like, it makes a bit, you should be aware of the politics and how that all works in an organization. And you do need to be like, not 100% cynical about it, but if you're like 100% idealistic about it, you're going to, I guess, as you said earlier, Neha, like burn out. And to your metaphor about table flips, Denise, like that's what I really like about that, right? It reminded me that metaphor as well. Like I'm sure all of us had a wide variety of teachers in our schooling experience, right? Like, and the difference between the teachers who like lost their shit regularly and you would just tune it out because it was just happening so often. The teacher who like you were told by them for 5 years and only once did they properly lose their shit. And when that happens, you're like, shit, oh dear, like
It's
this is actually
business.
serious now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like that's the same thing with like table flips at work, right? Like if you're the type of person, like even aside from political capital, like even almost like the persona you present to your coworkers, if you're just the type of person who just like flies off the handle and it's like, this is unacceptable, this is going to destroy the company about like every single thing, then people just stop listening to you, right? But if you can like pick your battles, and when you have the political capital, when you've got the right people in place, when people don't think you're just doing it out of self-interest, then I feel like that's when you really get stuff done and can have an impact on the stuff you care about, right?
Yeah. It was really loud, very clear. I think to build on, echo everything Mike is saying, to build on that, I think I've heard a lot of people talk in the past year about how it's important to bring my whole self to work, or I want to engage authentically with work. I want to live my work life in a way that feels true to me. The term table flippers, Neha, do you know where table flippers came from? Do you remember the channel at Pivotal?
It might have been after my time,
Oh, okay. Okay. So a brief
or
history on the
maybe. Anyway, tell me. Yeah.
so table flippers, like I didn't just make that up actually. That was like the most inside of inside baseball for any women and non-binary people who were at Pivotal R&D, mostly R&D, I think from like 2016 to maybe 2017, 2018. That was the name of a back channel that we had for all female and non-binary employees. There were like hundreds of people in there. This is like the most active back channel that I've ever seen at any workplace. But it was a place to vent and for people to find safety and security in, numbers and shared identity. And one of the most common themes of discussion that came up in that channel were, hey, I had a really great interaction with my white male colleague. Sometimes it would be, negative stories as well, but a lot of it was positive. A lot of it was like, here's a story about allyship. Here's a story about a time that someone on my team really got my back. And so through that back channel, all the women and the non-binary folks in the company kind of learned who are the safe men, who are the safe people we can go to.
Interesting. Yeah.
To sort of engage for, like, we never thought about it as political capital back at that time. But essentially that was what it was. It was like a whisper network of the safe people that you can go to ask for political capital and help and that sort of thing. So that's, again, like another one of those, like, here's my very, very personal experience woven into this like larger commentary about, basically like how to survive at work, how to survive under capitalism. I actually edited out a thing in the talk. I wanted to go on this like 4-minute rant about capitalism, but then I was like, I'm already at 27 minutes, but 25-minute time slot. I need to cut this. But I think a lot of like bringing for people who, if you hear the phrase, I want to bring my whole self to work and I want to live authentically at work, then maybe one way to do that is to figure out how you can send that signal to people who have less privilege than you and figure out like, allyship obviously is a word that we've had for a very, very long time. And I think this is basically an extension of that, right? It almost feels like oversimplifying to just say like, be a good ally. But I think like that is still pretty relevant. I don't know, even in 2025. So I think that's a big part of it. I think I've been pretty lucky in my career so far to never have to directly ask anyone for that help, but to have people come out of the woodwork over and over again, or to just show through repeated behavior and repeated action that, like by putting messages. A really good example actually of a way to indicate this is if you do AMAs, if a company has like question section with our come ask our leadership anything, you're a woman of color, might not be totally safe to ask a question like, hey, what about those RSUs that you promised everyone? But maybe safer for someone who does have a little more privilege to say like, hey, I've heard from a number of my peers that, we're worried about this RSU, whatever, sort of frame it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely done that before. Well, I think there's a few interesting layers to it. So now when I'm trying to identify if someone like has like ally potential or like ally interest, right? Like even when you do all of these trainings, these DI&B trainings, if you're doing them in a group or in person, right? Like at the end, they'll always be like, oh, what's your commitment? Right. And like most people will be like, oh, I want to be more aware of it. And so those people in the trash, like clearly you don't want to change anything. But if someone's like, okay, cool, I want to try one or two things. I think I want to try this. I'm like, okay, cool. This person thinks they want to try it. Let's like give them a taste, right? And so I have like this small list of people in my head that I'm like, okay, cool. Next time I want to ask a question in an MA, I'm going to approach them and I'm going to ask them if they would ask on my behalf. Now, at most of the companies that I've been with, I've accrued political capital pretty quickly, and I don't necessarily need someone else to ask a question for me. But that's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it to see if, hey, is this person an ally and willing to do it? And if they do, then I will go back to my table flippers channel and I will be like, hey, I asked this person if they would ask a question for me. They did, right? Like action, completion, check mark, right? Like we've got one check mark, or maybe I'll wait until like 3 check marks before I like go back and tell the people. But like I've had also people come to me, we got to work in a team which was very unique at some point because it was like 45% women and non-binary, and it was like 40% people of color. And so, funnily, once we started bringing in some white men into the group, like cis white men, they would be like, oh my God, this feels weird because I feel like I'm taking someone's spot. And like, this is all also kind of like shit you can't fully say on stage, but fuck it. Um, I, I would tell them, you have a very important role. Like, if you think that there's no place for you on the team, there absolutely is, because if I mean, it would be kind of great to just have like all women of color on a team, but like at some point you are going to have to connect with the rest of reality, which is like something you talk about in your talk, Denise. Like you can't be in a bubble, you need to be in like a porous, time-based bubble. And if we're going to re-engage with the world and they're not going to be at the same level of awareness and thinking and practice around weighing opinions equally, we're going to need some help. And so those people who say like, I don't know if this is like, is it okay that I'm on this team? I'm like, yes, we're going to ask you for help and you're going to do it. And if you're ready and you're committed and you're interested in experiencing something that you might not be able to experience before, because the composition is so fundamentally different with people with different backgrounds, you can have this privilege if you're willing to put in the work. And I absolutely would put everyone to the test. Now, it's not like, oh, cool, I've like marked them for like 3 tests or whatever. But those things just come up naturally because capitalism, right? And so my favorite one that always happens is that, I mean, as you go higher and higher up, your manager just changes all the time. So it's like every single time I got a new manager, they would look at the team and they'd be like, this is different. I can't tell what it is, but it feels different. Is that bad? And I'd be like, army of white men, go. Right. And so, like, Mike and others had like a very important responsibility, which was to take those questions and to answer with the laden with privilege that they naturally had without even thinking or doing anything. I'm just like, Mike, can you just answer the questions and just say truthful things? And all of a sudden, the eye of Sauron would move on, right? So, uh, I don't know if you realized the full extent to, I mean, I was pretty transparent with you, Mike. I'd be like, Mike, you're a white guy. Like, can you do something for me? I don't recommend doing that all the time, but if you get to know someone pretty well, you can be a little bit more transparent about it.
I think I was somewhat aware. I think like jumping back to something you talked about earlier, Denise, like is like the whole those of us who've been through employee surveys and it's like, do you feel you're bringing your whole self to work? Like it's funny because I used to kind of get grumpy about those for lots of reasons. And I've decided now, I think there's like a sweet spot in there, right? Where like 0% bring your full self to work is bad, but also in some ways 100% is also bad. And I think
Yes,
often like
I agree.
people who are, like people like me grow up as, engineers, do the computer science degree, like, like just have a very stereotypical background into tech. It's like, to me, bringing 100% of my full self to work is like, I get to monologue for 30 minutes about code quality. I get to interrupt people whenever I feel like it because I like doing that. It's like all of these things where it's like, well, maybe bring your whole self to work is not doing some of those things. And maybe like being like, I feel I can bring 75% of myself to work, but actually that's a better version of me than my personal preferences. Like that feels like it sort of loops in with both of what you were saying. And also like the slight kind of like, oh, politics is icky. Like, I feel like I'm compromising myself by doing this. I feel like I'm compromising myself by like asking the question that I don't really care about, but Neha cares about. It's like, well, you're compromising yourself all sorts of ways, right? Maybe this could be a way that you could do so that would actually be good and help people and build a better organization and build a better team and all of this kind of good stuff. And maybe like shave off some of your round edges, which, you may or may not have learned in therapy is probably a good idea everywhere in your life, not just in the workplace. So
yeah, I've learned over the years that I have a better time at work if I'm intentional about what percentage of myself I do bring to work and what percentage I sort of leave at the, at the door. Well, work from home, so not really. But yeah, like one exercise that I used to have, I still sort of do, I sort of have like my, direct reports do is, especially if you're unsure about what you want to get out of work, or if you're feeling lost or confused, or you're like, I think I want to leave this company, but I don't know what I want to do next. It's like, sit down and literally make some lists, right? Make one list that says, what are the experiences, skills, and relationships that you want to get right now? And make another list that represents what can this like current team, current job with no changes, like what can this situation offer you? And figure out what's in the intersection between those two lists. And that was just like something that I had people do to have them start to think a little bit more intentionally about work and make them realize that you actually do have a little more in your control than you might realize. And the more that you can kind of strategize about how you're going to relate to this job, the less you will find yourself losing to, like, hopefully we slow the roll of burnout, A, like that's sort of my interest as a manager, but B, like, I want you to like, accept that capitalism is just going to extract from us, right? That's something that none of us have control over. But what you do have control over is like, what do you actually want to extract from your current situation? And then tell me so that as your manager, I can position you to help you gain those skills and experiences and relationships. And I really try to emphasize the relationships because, like look at us three sitting here, like we don't all work in the same place anymore. But relationships are such a huge part of what you should aim to take out of every single job because there will be a couple of good people that you work with that you might want to work with again in the future. It's not just, like learn Golang, learn test driven development, whatever. That stuff, like you will eventually learn those things. And I think that when it comes to, like the higher, when you're at the senior like management level and you're like everyone goes through the same thing again. We're like, oh God, I don't know what I want to do next. Like, I don't know. I'm not learning anymore. I'm not growing. What should I be doing? So probably do the same exercise again, right? Like, but think about what are the things that you're currently bringing. So what is 100% of yourself, and then like what is the strategic 75% of yourself that you can afford to still give to the job, and maybe what's the 25% that you need to find and you need to express it in other ways in your life, like go join, I don't know, improv comedy or something. I haven't done that, but go do something in your personal life that enriches you and ticks those boxes because it might be unstrategic or it might be dangerous to do some of those things at work.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, personally, I feel like I'm never going to bring 100% of myself to work because y'all don't deserve it. Um, like, I'll give you a piece of it,
Yeah.
but not everything, right? Some things can be left to myself.
Hmm.
I think what I really liked about what you said, Denise, is that it is really critical to be intentional about what you're doing this for, what you're getting out of it, what you're getting out of these experiences. And every single job or every single place you go to is a sandbox. And so I even feel like high school was a sandbox, college was a sandbox, right? Every job is a sandbox. And if you feel like you're not growing anymore, test the limits. And if you've never been involved in politics anymore, if you have enough capital to be wrong once or twice, then you can test something out and try something new. And like, understand that out of the first 3 times, 2 of them are going to be failures. Maybe you get beginner's luck, but you may not necessarily have that continued streak. And if you do have a continued streak of being right every single time, you're not trying hard enough. Like, there is no reward if you don't take risk. And it is important to be strategic about how you go about doing that. And when you start to have a purpose and you have something that you're experimenting with, things get fun again and you like can get into the flow. Yeah, that's kind of like a lot of different lessons that you can learn, especially if you might be on your way out and you have some political capital to spend. You can start experimenting a little bit and learn something about yourself on your way out too.
Thank you both. That was an amazing conversation. Went a bit differently to how I thought, but this is the beauty of having a guest on who you don't know quite as well as Neha, who I know too well at this point. Thank you so much for joining us, Denise. Thank you, Neha, for being here as ever. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And catch you next time.